Good morning, everybody. As you heard, I have been a uni lifer. I have worked with Unilever all my life, and I just started my 30th year. And a large part of my 30 years were spent in marketing before I moved into more general management roles. And I'm absolutely passionate about marketing. I'm absolutely inspired by the work that marketeers and brands can do to change the world. You also heard about my purpose. Unilever is pretty high on purpose, not just on brand purpose, but also on leadership purpose. And my purpose, as you heard, was to inspire others to reach the utopia they thought they couldn't get to. So when I was asked to give the keynote for this session, it was only natural that I brought both of these together. And my key session today, knowing that many of you in the audience today are either at the start of your marketing journey or at the middle of your marketing journey and are operating in a context of massive change. My key message to everybody today is how all of you can prepare yourselves to become CMOs in the future, recognizing the fact that it's not easy to be a CMO today with all the change that's happening. I also know that there are a lot of founders, lots of general managers, lots of CEOs in the audience, and I'll also have some messages for you on how you can get the best out of your CMOs, okay? So that's basically what I'm going to focus on over the next 25 to 30 minutes, hopefully setting the stage for all the wonderful sessions that are going to come in after my session. But obviously, being a marketer at heart, I have to start with getting to know my audience a little bit. So I just want to get a show of hands first. So how many of you are already CMOs in the room? Any CMOs in the room? Yeah, so we have maybe about 5-6%. Obviously, the question is, so who wants to be a CMO in the room? So how many of you would like to be a CMO? Okay, so that's a little bit more, maybe about 35-40%. And obviously, the second question is, do you feel ready? Do you have what it takes to be a CMO? How many of you feel you're absolutely ready? Yeah, so maybe, 2-3-4%, yeah, which is what I had kind of expected because it's a period of massive change. And lastly, just to get a sense on the spread of industries, just maybe a show of hands, how many of you work in FMCG? Okay, lesser than I thought. I thought it'll be almost half, but it's about 25%. How many of you work in telecom? Not too many. Healthcare? Okay, so a lot more in healthcare. Fintech, financial services, banking. Okay. Automotive? Okay, so a lot more varied than I thought. I thought I would be having a lot more CPG folks in the room, but that's great actually. And I hope that my experiences, which have been founded more in an FMCG, CPG space, will still be of relevance and impact for everybody. So let's move. I have some good news and I have some bad news. And because I like to look at the bad news first, I think the starting point is this statistic that came out of a survey that was done recently. The reality is it's not easy to be a CMO right now, and CMO tenures are coming down. Fortune 500 companies, if you look at the average CMO tenure, it's come down by about 3 months in a period of 1 year, from 51 months to 49 months. The top 100 advertisers globally, it's even lower. It's come down from 42 months to 39 months. Now, part of this is good. Part of this is the fact that, as you heard from Anirban, a lot of CMOs are getting promoted to become general managers and CEOs. So that explains a part of it. But the other part of it is that there is a lot of churn. Lots of incumbent CMOs are not able to deliver the goods that they are tasked with, and therefore there is a churn. So it's not easy being a CMO. The CMO tenure is coming down. But is there a good news? Hell yes. And that is that CMOs are going to command top dollar, especially if they are future fit. And people are willing to pay a premium for CMOs who have what it takes to deliver the goods in this changing context. So, as always, we start with the two messages: tenure under pressure, but for those of you who are going to invest in yourselves and become future fit, there will be a lot of takers for you. And this is also another interesting thing. The CMO role is changing, and I think that's part of the reason why this tenure pressure comes up. And you just have to look at the fact that across the world today, less than a third of so-called CMOs have the title CMO. It's no longer CMOs anymore. And that's reflecting the changing nature of the job. Unilever itself has experimented with different titles. And some of you in the audience may say, so what's in a name? Call a rose by any other name and it smells just as sweet. But the reality is this is one of those cases where there is so much change happening that it does merit a relook. And I don't expect you to read all of this, but you can just see there are a variety of titles that are playing out, and that's reflecting the changing nature of the role. Chief Growth Officer, Chief Customer and Brand Officer, Chief Revenue Officer, Chief Experience Officer. And maybe just a show of hands, have any one of you heard of the concept of a fractional CMO? Yeah, so many of you have had. So yeah, that's also playing out in the world today, and that CMOs are splitting their time and giving a little bit of themselves to a variety of different companies. So what's really happening? And I try to distill this down to the simplest possible explanation, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. There are two big forces colliding with each other. So there is a supply side change and there's a demand side change. On the supply side change, and you see that outside, you just have to walk in. I spend a bit of time in the morning with the startups outside. There is just massive change in the forces of technology that all of us are only too familiar with, be it on the hardware side, cloud, chips, be it on the software side, especially at the infrastructure layer, when you look at what's happening with LLMs and when you look at what's happening with blockchain. So lots of technology-led changes. Then there is, of course, what's happening with retailers and media, and the famous convergence that's happening. Yes, social media platforms have been around for a long time. Yes, e-commerce has been around for a long time. But now look at what's happening with TikTok. TikTok now has not just short-form video, but also has TikTok ads and TikTok shops. You look at Instagram, and you have Instagram shopping coming in. So a lot of the players in the ecosystem are looking to move up and down the stack, and that is then creating opportunities, but also issues. If you look at it from the demand side, and I think this is for me the most fundamental change that is starting to play out now and will play out right through the end of this decade, is my son, who's 20, is now going to enter the consuming class. So we talked about the millennials, but Generation Alpha is also coming into the equation. And that is going to be the big change that will play out over this decade. Put these two together, and it creates an amazing world of opportunities, but also demands. More personalization possible. You will see the rise of the wall gardens. We've seen that it's going to be a seminal trend across. Lots of opportunity for data, analytics, and automation. But equally on the demand side, a lot more demands for more purposeful and sustainable brands, a lot more omni-channel shopping, a lot more entertainment seeking, and trust will be at a premium. Especially with the advent of technology, brands will have to be able to provide trust and stand for trust. It's not going to be easy. So this is the context in which there's a lot of change happening. And I think if I look at the manifestation of this, Sudhir is in the room, Vikas you will hear, and they've all played very, very important roles in building this beautiful brand called Surf Excel, which today is $1 billion plus brand. If you look at the classic role of a CMO, and for many generations of leaders who have worked on a brand like Surf Excel, the focus was enormously on how do you create a purposeful brand, how do you create great advertising, how do you have impactful media plans, how do you then innovate around this brand. And that kept a lot of us busy over the last 15, 20 years. But if you look at the landscape today, and I have to say the work that Cadbury does and the work that they're doing across their brands is really fantastic. Data-led, customer analytics, lots of AI being used, lots of first-party data being built in. And this is the life of a lot of us today. Some of us have more of this based on the industry in which we are in. Some of us have less of it. But the reality is, as the supply side and demand side changes continue to take place, this is going to be the life for everybody over the coming years. And the question is, are you ready to operate in this environment? So the classic CMO role, and I just put down a few words, all of us recognize is typically a brand custodian, typically a market and consumer insider, having a budget, tasked with spending it, generating a return, being a sales enabler, working with the media teams to plan impactful actions. This is typically the job profile of a CMO and the entire marketing team, a functional leader. And therefore, the question I started to think about is, with all this change, how do you then start to develop yourself to become a CMO in a future where everything is going to be changing? And therefore, I tried to reframe it for myself and try to say, what are the different roles now that a CMO will have to do? And this now then takes me to the second part of my session. I've done a bit of context setting to talk about how should we frame the role of the CMO going forward. And then I'm going to throw a lot of ideas to you on how you can develop yourself in order to be ready for this context. So a reframing, and I just put down 3, 4 of many of the roles that are there, and I'm going to use a new set of language, which then forms the cornerstone of my pitch to you today. So yes, a classic CMO was focused a lot on being a brand custodian and a product innovator. And I think the first thing that I believe is that the CMO of the future is somebody who's going to be able to architect the organization much more than before. The data strategy, the sustainability strategy, the brand strategy, the technology strategy. I'll talk more about this as we go forward. So how does the CMO become more the architect for the organization? Moving from being a market insider and a budget owner, you heard about the concept of ROI. I think CMOs will have to become more of the ROI champions, not just depend on the CFO to do that. Yes, CMOs have been creative directors and sales enablers, but going forward, we'll need to bring audience first thinking and channel first thinking to become the omni-channel leader. And lastly, generally a functional leader in some organizations, I would say definitely in a company like Unilever, also often tasked with running the P&L. And going forward, CMOs will have to become the unifiers in the organization to make sure that the organization silos that are there are removed and there's a seamless working, especially at the executive team level, and often pitching the organization to the board. So this is the frame that I'm going to use. I hope you find it useful for you to think about how you should architect yourself to move forward. And I just want to share two other foundational principles before I then go into a rapid fire download to you of ideas. I don't intend to be prescriptive, but just going to share with you lots of ideas that many of you could start to build for yourself. Two foundational principles. I found this very useful for myself. I came across this recently, and one of the senior ex-HUL leaders talked about the fact that you get recruited for your IQ, you get promoted for your EQ, but your career longevity and your impact is based on your AQ, and AQ is about your adaptability quotient. And this is definitely playing out for me in my life. As I said, I've spent 30 years in Unilever, and I constantly have had to adapt, and I am adapting even now as I speak to the changing context, because everything that I was taught in my foundational years are actually not that relevant today. So this is one foundational principle. How are all of you going to adapt to a changing context so that you have long careers and achieve your dreams? And I think the second message is, key message for today, if there's one takeaway I want all of you to have, is you have to be very deliberate and focused in building your own make it to CMO plan. It won't happen just like that. It's going to require a lot of deliberate focus. And in Unilever, we have this concept of the individual development plan, and it's based on what is called a 70-20-10. 70% of it is in the job, 20% through relationships, 10% through formal training. And I'm going to try to attempt that as I go forward to say for each one of these four role definitions, what are potential 70-20-10 ideas that all of you could take? I have had the opportunity to write my own development plan for myself, for my direct team, but over the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of time also doing it for my skip level. And I can tell you that it works when there is a formality and there is a deliberate focus. We don't spend enough time on that. We often only focus on giving feedback to people at the end of the performance cycle, but we don't spend enough in very formally contracting with ourselves and with our teams. What are you going to do about the feedback that you've got? And I think that that's my main message to everybody today. You won't make it until you're very deliberate about a development plan that you set up for yourself. So I have about 10 minutes left, and I'm going to now do a whirlwind tour around the four roles and what are the questions you should be asking yourself, and what are the things that you should, what are the different experiences that you should seek out for yourself as you craft your own development plan. So let's start with the architect, and there are many dimensions to it. The first one is obviously around brand purpose. You can't not talk about brands and what brands stand for and how do you move from marketing to mattering in the world today. And there are many, many elements and many, many questions that you can ask yourself. Having had the privilege of working on some of the big purposeful brands of Unilever, I think one of the hardest things for a CMO and a marketer to do is to be able to very clearly and very simply be able to separate what are the functional benefits, what are the emotional benefits, and what are the societal benefits of a brand. We often talk very loosely about brand purpose. Of course, at some level, all brands are purposeful. But just because a brand has a very strong emotional connection with consumers doesn't necessarily mean that it is really addressing some of the big societal or environmental challenges of our time. Being able to craft that, write that very, very sharply, and then being able to link the societal benefit with the product benefit is hard work. Doesn't happen. We make a lot of mistakes. I see Gitika in the room, and she and me in our previous lives have spent hours talking about Rin and Vim, for example, on how to craft these brands so that the core functionality and the societal benefits of these brands were seamless, easy to communicate, and working well. In Unilever, we have this concept that all brands have to, strong brands have to not just talk, but they have to walk the talk also. So brand say and brand do are foundational concepts. And how do you set yourself up for that? Diversity and inclusion is a very, very important theme, and it's not that easy for large brands to be able to then pick themes that are relevant for some parts in the organization. One of my best examples that I've seen in Unilever, Dove does this really well, of course, but a beautiful example of innovation was what Rexona did recently, where they redesigned packaging for differently abled people because they were struggling to use this packaging in the shower, the normal one. And interestingly, what you find is packaging designed for differently abled people was also super well preferred by the rest of the audience who didn't have some of those difficulties. So sometimes you can actually create better performing products by addressing the needs of disadvantaged or smaller groups. And last but most important, are you as potential CMOs really clear about brand safety, ad fraud? What are you going to do in the era of generative AI when there are deep fakes all around? If a very famous celebrity comes and trashes your brand and it's made with a deep fake, what are you going to do? How are you going to be prepared for this? So these are some of the themes that you should be aware of. And I then start to throw some 70, 20, 10 ideas to you. As I said, I don't intend to be prescriptive, but just some ideas that I've been thinking about, some I've done for myself, some which some of my team members have done. And if each one of you could even just take one idea at the end of this session and start to work on it, I think my 25 minutes would have been well spent. I would urge many of you to join a CMO peer group. Think about brands like the Institute for Real Growth. There's a fantastic podcast available called the CPG Guys or the FMCG Guys. And these give you access to thought leaders, content, and for people to share and for you to sort of declutter your mind when you're grappling with some of these issues. I would urge all of you to try to do ethnographic or expert connects with audiences which are disadvantaged or marginalized. You'll be amazed with the wealth of insights that come up. How many of you really understand the media supply chain and how ad fraud is all prevalent and how do you avoid and overcome clickbaiting? And the ASCII Academy has a fantastic program on responsible advertising practices, and it's really important for future CMOs to be absolutely aware of this and to put that into practice. So these would be some of the ideas that I had which I wanted to share. Again, not in the idea of being prescriptive, but to just get you to start to think about your development plan. Sustainability. This is going to be one of the defining themes of this decade. Yes, there is a backlash around sustainability in some parts of the world. Look at what's happening in the US. But if I keep the politics aside, I'm absolutely clear that CMOs of the future will have to know their financial measures and their non-financial measures of their brands really, really strongly. How many of you are already skilled to understand the difference between Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions, the difference between recycled and recyclable packaging, what's happening to the recycling infrastructure in the country? These are all themes that all of you will have to grapple with, because as we get closer to the end of this decade and the future, the path to net zero and the demands on marketeers to make these trade-offs between performance, cost, and your footprint is going to be absolutely live, and many of you are going to have to grapple with it. Is your mindset around ESG going to be compliance-led? Yes, I have to do a BR, SR report, so I tick it. Or is it going to be linked to driving compelling consumer benefits underpinned by sustainable technologies? Again, something that CMOs are going to have to grapple with. My suggestion to you, do get an ESG certification done. Understand the language. Competent Boards has a fantastic program. If you're interested, you can sign up for this. Deeply understand your organization ESG targets. These are not easy. How are they going to be measured? What does that mean for your cost structures? These are things that CMOs are going to have to grapple with. For those of you in consumer goods, more than 90% of your emissions are coming not from your operations. They're coming from your value chain, either from the ingredients that you buy or what happens to your products after they are disposed. And if you don't start to understand this, work with your supply chain partners, you will not be able to bring your emissions under control. And my big request, and there I have to thank Sanjeev, he's in the room. When I was working for him, he made me in charge of the enterprise ESG program in HUL. And I wasn't sure what benefits it was going to add to me then, because I already had a busy full-time job. But in hindsight, one of the best things that you did, Sanjeev, because I think I upskilled myself tremendously on all things to do with ESG. Because of this, I think I'm a better leader because of this. And you have to take personal sponsorship for your sustainability funnel and the kill, pivot, and scale decisions. Data. Big theme, and I'm going to keep coming back to data, ad tech, and martech. I think CMOs have to become much more skilled at this. So what data do you really need, and why do you need it? When it comes to first-party data, how are you going to get it? How are you going to get it at the lowest cost? How are you going to store it? How are you going to use it? How are you going to keep the data warm? Because IDs have a limited period after which they expire. What are the strategic partnerships you're going to do at the level of 2P and 3P data? And how are you going to work this through? These are very, very important decisions that CMOs cannot delegate because there is cost attached to this. One of my best examples where I've been personally involved was a fantastic 2P partnership that we did with Lion in Thailand. Lion is the WhatsApp of Thailand. And once we got access to a whole lot of rich first-party data, the amount of richness that we got in terms of consumer cohorts and our ability to not just do lookalikes but also do one-to-one marketing with 36 out of the 60 million Thais that we have access to, just took the whole marketing game and the ROI to a completely new level. So, these are the things that CMOs are going to have to grapple with. And I think going forward, most organizations will have to invest, if not already done, into a CDP, a consumer data platform. Are you as a CMO clear about how you're going to select your CDP? Or are you just delegating that to your chief information officer and to your IT team? I think it's really important because once a CDP is set up, the workflows inside the organization to make use of the data and the stack is going to impact the life of your marketing team. It's going to impact the life of your sales team. So really important that CMOs have the ability to understand the CDP and understand how to select. And Gartner has some fantastic work here. And again, from a 70-20-10 point of view, your own personal sponsorship around your data acquisition strategy and how are you experimenting with different forms of data acquisition, QR codes, InMobi actions, Facebook surveys, lead generation ads. What are you going to use and how are you going to make sure that the cost of acquisition is brought down to the lowest? That is a very important deliverable for a CMO. And finally, I can't say enough about this, and it was really interesting in the morning speaking to a lot of the founders or the startups outside. CMOs have to be involved in the setup of the ad tech and martech technology bets for the organization. Have you defined your value-based, the value and the outcomes that you want? It's easy to fall in love with the tech, but what are the outcomes you're trying to drive as a CMO, and how is tech going to play a part in this? There's a lot happening in autonomous innovation. This is where you use a whole lot of AI to innovate, to increase the cycle time to market. And the question is, are you skilled in this? Are you part of the digital transformation team in your organization, or are you just called on when there's a decision to be made? 70-20-10, I had the opportunity to give a keynote 2 weeks ago on the strategic use of AI in CPG. If you're interested, please have a look at that. I have covered a whole lot of use cases across the entire value chain, and you will get a sense for how AI can be used strategically, linked to specific outcomes. I would urge many of you to link into a VC system, start to mentor, coach, and maybe even one day put a little bit of money into investing behind ad tech and martech startups and generative AI startups. There's a fantastic journal called the Consumer Goods Technology CGT. Gives you everything that's happening across the world, free to use, but find the time to read it and subscribe to it. And for those of you who are really interested, AI for CMOs and business leaders, fantastic course available with Kellogg's and MIT. Invest in it because this will build you up really nicely for the future. In terms of being the ROI champion, I think the big question is, do you have the ability to challenge the current ROI frameworks in your organization? And are you being able to use advanced analytics in order to drive better decision making? Don't leave this to only the CFO to chase you and to ask you for, how is your campaign doing? As a CMO, you have to champion the cause of superior ROI in your organization. Personally understand attribution models. Engage with analytics teams like Fractal, Sigmoid, even Infosys has a fantastic practice. Talk to them about your pain points and ask them to come to you with solutions, and through that you will learn. And again, lots happening in the VC space. Look out, seek out the startups who are trying to solve a lot of the big problems with technology. When it comes to being an omni-channel leader, do you have your audience first journeys mapped? Are they quantified? Do you have channel first thinking in your plans? Are you able to stand eye to eye with Meta and with Google and talk about how well you are executing inside their walled gardens and how they can support you better? Are you equipped to better use the open web? Do you have clarity around your content strategy? What part is going to be machine-led? What part is going to be human-led? What part is going to be a hybrid? And how are you better leveraging partnerships? Lots of things for people to grapple with. And again, some ideas here. Spend time with influencers and creators. I had an eye-opening experience last year when I did focus group discussions with influencers in Mumbai and in Lucknow to understand their pain points. And I was just not prepared for the amount of feedback I got on how difficult brand managers were making lives for influencers with the kind of briefs that were being given. Too constraining, too narrow, not liberating enough, and many of them didn't want to work with brands that were not giving them creative space. Understand gaming. I don't know how many of you like gaming, but gaming is going to be one of the important themes, and you must get in. I would urge you to constantly do a lot of top-to-tops, customers, publishers, social media platforms. Understand new commerce models, quick commerce, social commerce. Understand the impact that ONDC is going to have on the e-commerce landscape in the country. And again, a massive opportunity with generative AI. There's a fantastic startup outside talking about WhatsApp-based commerce and content and conversations. Understand them. And my last part before I wrap up, I think I'm just about on time, is when it comes to being the unifier, two thoughts. One is on marketing talent. How are you going to lead a talent that is a talent base which is going to be made up of a lot of Gen Alpha talent, absolutely digitally savvy? How are you going to give them the space to lead? What's your build versus buy strategy in order to create teams that are strong for the future? How are you going to design the marketing organization, the marketing workflow, and the reward systems in the marketing organization in a world which is going to be fully AI-led? If the machine is creating all the content, then what does that mean for reward? What does that mean for output? How do you think about that? And most importantly, typically a role often done by the CFO. How are you as the CMO going to support the CEO better to drive better executive team alignment and better board alignment? Especially in this context where lots of boards are challenging the CEO and the organization around how well prepared they are for all the forces that are being unleashed in the world. I would encourage CMOs to lead a lot of external immersions for their organizations. Many of you must get into reverse mentoring and engagement with young talent, understand their needs and what are they looking for from a CMO. As I said, put your hands up to be part of the digital marketing, the digital transformation and sustainability squads. And I often find marketers being very, very defensive about their work. They don't want to share their failures too easily, and they don't want to talk about the learnings that they've had. Be very, very transparent about the impact of marketing, what's working, what's not working, because through that, you will also get the support of other executive team members and other parts of the organization for you as a CMO to play this important role of being a unifier. So that's basically a whirlwind tour, as I said. Different ways to think about the CMO's role. I threw a lot of ideas at you on what you could do, but I want to wrap up with a few words. For the CEOs, GMs, and founders in the room, a couple of key messages. Hire your CMO for their adaptability quotient, not on the basis of what they have done in the past, because I'm telling you they're going to fail. But then also trust them. Hire them for their AQ, and then trust them, give them the space to show their mojo. Not all organizations do this well. I was really lucky to work with Unilever as a company where marketers were at the forefront of the organization in terms of linkage to business and the creation of value. But I don't see this happening everywhere. Signal as a CEO to your organization that the CMO is core to the business and not a support function. I would encourage a lot of CEOs to continue to give time in boardroom discussions and make the brand strategy a key boardroom discussion. Give time to the CMO to lead external immersions so that you get the outside in. And finally, really make the CMO as a co-sponsor for your digital transformation and your sustainability program. Far too often I see CIOs and CFOs leading this, and they don't often trust the marketing team, and they don't trust the CMO enough to be able to take the right decisions. So I would urge CEOs, GMs, and founders to do this. So in summary, AQ more important than EQ, more important than IQ. And each one of you have to build your own plan. And my last message to you is write it, share it, review it, own it, and make it to CMO. Thank you all very much.